He was left for dead under the burning sun, but the widow who found him would teach him to live. The sun stood high in the sky, burning without mercy. The land below it looked endless, dry and silent, as if life itself had given up there. Heat waves rose from the ground, making the air shake. In the middle of this harsh place lay a man who no longer knew if he was alive or already gone. His name was Ethan, though at that moment even his name felt far away. Ethan's clothes were torn and covered in dust. His lips were cracked, his throat dry, and every breath felt like fire moving through his chest. He had not eaten or drunk anything for a long time. His body had stopped fighting the heat. His arms lay heavy by his sides, and his legs refused to move. The sun pressed down on him as if it wanted to erase him from the land. In his fading mind, memories came and went like broken pieces of a dream. He remembered being stronger once. He remembered laughing with people he trusted. He remembered believing life would always move forward. But those memories hurt more than the heat. They reminded him of everything he had lost. Not long ago, Ethan had been a man with plans. He worked hard and trusted easily. That trust had been his biggest mistake. People he believed in had turned away from him when things became difficult. Some used him. Others blamed him. When trouble came, no one stood by his side. Step by step, his life fell apart. He lost his work, his place to stay, and finally, his sense of direction. On the day he collapsed under the burning sun, Ethan had been walking without knowing where he was going. His body was already weak, but his mind was even more tired. He told himself to keep moving, but each step felt heavier than the last. When he finally fell, the ground was so hot it burned his skin, yet he did not have the strength to react. As the sun climbed higher, Ethan's thoughts became slow and unclear. He wondered if this was how it ended. No sound, no goodbye, no one to remember him. A strange calm washed over him. Part of him felt relief. Fighting had become too painful. Then, something changed. A shadow passed over his face. At first, Ethan thought it was another trick of his mind. He tried to open his eyes, but they barely moved. The shadow returned, larger this time, blocking the sun for a few seconds. A voice followed, soft, careful, unsure. "Is someone there?" The voice belonged to Clara. Clara was a widow who lived alone on the edge of this harsh land. Her small home stood far from towns and busy roads. She preferred it that way. Life had taught her that quiet was safer than crowds. Years ago, she had lost her husband suddenly. Since then, she learned to depend only on herself. She worked the land, fixed what broke, and kept her heart guarded. That morning, Clara had gone out to check a fence line near her property. She noticed something strange in the distance, something that did not belong. The land was familiar to her. She knew its shapes and colors. A shape lying still under the sun did not feel right. As she got closer, her steps slowed. Experience had taught her to be careful. But when she saw Ethan's face, pale and lifeless, her chest tightened. The sight brought back memories she tried hard to forget. She had once found her husband collapsed in a similar way. That day, she had been too late. Clara stood there for a long moment, her heart pulling her in two directions. One part of her wanted to turn away. Helping strangers often brought trouble. She had survived by keeping distance. But another part of her, deeper and stronger, refused to leave a man to die under the sun. She knelt beside Ethan and placed 2 fingers on his neck. The pulse was weak, but it was there. "He's still alive," she whispered to herself. Clara looked around. No one else was in sight. The land remained silent, as if waiting to see what she would do. With a heavy sigh, she made her decision. Getting Ethan to her home was not easy. He was taller and heavier than he looked. The heat made every movement harder. Clara used all her strength, stopping often to catch her breath. She dragged him into the shade first, then slowly helped him onto her small cart, the one she usually used for tools. Throughout the journey, Ethan drifted in and out of awareness. He felt moments of cool air, heard distant sounds, and sensed motion. At one point, he thought he felt water touch his lips. He tried to speak, but no words came out. By the time Clara reached her home, the sun had started to lower slightly, though the heat remained strong. She brought Ethan inside and laid him on a simple bed near the window. The room smelled of clean earth and dried herbs. Clara moved quickly, but calmly. She had no medical training, only experience and instinct. She gave Ethan small amounts of water, careful not to rush. She cleaned his face and arms, removing layers of dust. His skin was hot and his breathing uneven. Clara stayed nearby, watching him closely, ready to act if his condition changed. As the hours passed, Ethan's breathing slowly became steadier. His face relaxed, though his eyes remained closed. Clara finally allowed herself to sit down. Her body ached, but her mind was busy. She wondered who this man was, and how he ended up so close to death. She did not expect answers right away. Some stories reveal themselves only when a person is ready to tell them. As night approached, the land outside cooled. The sky shifted from bright blue to deep orange, then purple. Clara lit a small lamp and checked on Ethan again. This time, his eyes fluttered open for a brief moment. They were unfocused, filled with confusion and fear. "You're safe," Clara said gently. "Don't try to move." Ethan wanted to ask where he was, who she was, why she helped him, but exhaustion pulled him back into sleep before any words could form. Clara watched him for a long time. She knew this choice would change her quiet life. Bringing him here meant responsibility. It meant risk. But it also meant giving someone a second chance, something she once wished the world had given her husband. Outside, the same sun that nearly ended Ethan's life disappeared beyond the horizon. Darkness settled over the land, calm and still. Inside the small house, two strangers shared the same space, connected by a moment neither of them had planned. Under that burning sky, Ethan had been left for dead. But because one widow chose compassion over fear, his story did not end there. It was only beginning. Ethan woke slowly the next morning. The sunlight filtered through the thin curtains, painting warm stripes across the small room. For a moment he did not know where he was. His body ached, and his throat was raw from thirst. He tried to move, but the simple act of lifting his arm felt like lifting a mountain. Panic rose in his chest. He remembered the sun, the heat, the burning land, and then he remembered nothing else. "Easy," a calm voice said. Ethan turned his head and saw Clara sitting in a chair nearby, her hands folded in her lap. She looked tired, but there was a quiet strength about her, a sense that she had faced more hardships than most people ever would. "You're safe here," she told him. "You need to rest before you move again." Ethan tried to speak, to ask who she was, why she had helped him, but his throat refused to cooperate. All that came out was a soft croak. Clara smiled faintly, understanding without needing words. She got up and poured a small cup of water. With careful hands, she guided it to his lips, letting him sip slowly. Each drop felt like a tiny miracle, and Ethan's mind began to clear just enough to realize that he was alive. He studied Clara without speaking. She was a quiet woman, not tall, but with strong shoulders that carried years of work. Her hair was tied back simply, streaked with silver despite her age. Her eyes were sharp but gentle, the kind of eyes that seemed to see the truth in a person. Ethan's pride whispered that he should thank her, but he could not bring himself to speak. Clara noticed the hesitation. "Don't worry about words," she said. "Actions are enough for now. You need strength more than explanations." Days passed, and Ethan began to recover slowly. Now, his body was weak, but he could sit up and even stand with help. Clara offered him food in small portions, a bit of bread, some soup made from dried vegetables she had kept in her pantry. At first he pushed the food away, ashamed that he was dependent on someone else, but hunger was stronger than pride. He ate quietly, aware that he was entirely in her care. Clara did not press him with questions. She did not demand stories about his past or why he had been left to die. Instead, she offered routines and simple kindness, and encouraged him to rest. Each day she reminded him to rest. Each day she reminded him to drink, to sit in the shade, to move slowly. Ethan was frustrated by the simplicity of it, but slowly he began to understand that survival itself was a skill he had forgotten. At night, when the work of the day was done, Ethan watched Clara move around her home. She did small tasks quietly, sweeping the floor, checking her garden, mending a torn blanket. She never seemed hurried, never complained, and never demanded anything from him. In her presence, he felt a strange calm he had not known in years. It was not peace, exactly, but the feeling that he was allowed to exist without proving his worth. Clara noticed the moments when he looked lost. "It's normal to feel out of place," she said one evening. "The world can be too much when you've been hurt, but here you can begin again." Her words were simple, but they carried weight. Ethan realized that she had seen pain before, and that she had chosen not to turn away even when it was easier to leave. As Ethan regained strength, he began to notice the land around Clara's home. Unlike the barren stretches where he had been left, this place had life. Small shrubs grew near the house, and the garden contained vegetables, herbs, and a few flowers that bloomed against the odds. Clara tended everything with patience, her hands rough but careful. Ethan realized that she was teaching him something without even trying to explain it. Care and attention could turn a harsh place into a home. One morning, Clara asked him to help her with small chores. She handed him a bucket and said, "We need water for the garden. Take it slow." He was not strong, and he felt clumsy, but Clara stood quietly, waiting. With each step carrying water to the plants, he discovered the rhythm of work, the satisfaction of seeing results from effort. The sun still burned down, but it felt less like an enemy when he was moving with purpose. Days turned into weeks. Ethan's body regained some strength, and his mind began to settle. Clara continued her quiet lessons, not with lectures, but through her actions. She showed him how to plant seeds, how to gather water, how to make small repairs around the home. Each act taught patience and respect. Ethan learned that life was not about rushing, demanding, or blaming others. It was about presence and persistence. Evenings became times for conversation, though slowly. At first, Ethan spoke little. His past had made him wary of trusting anyone. Clara never pressed him, only offered stories of her own life. When the silence became heavy, she spoke of her husband, the way they had lived together, the lessons she learned from loss. Ethan listened, realizing that her experiences were not meant to burden him, but to guide him. At one point, Ethan tried to share a fragment of his story. I was left, I don't know. His voice faltered. Clara placed a hand gently on his arm. "It's okay," she said softly. "You don't have to tell me everything now. Start when you're ready." The patience in her voice was unlike anything he had experienced before. It allowed him to breathe, to understand that healing was not a race, and that mistakes of the past did not have to define his present. Ethan began to feel something he had not felt in a long time: hope. It was quiet, almost fragile, but it was there. He began helping more with the house, carrying firewood, washing dishes, and tending the garden. With each day, the shame of needing help lessened. Clara treated him not as a burden, but as someone capable of growth. Even though he regained strength physically, Ethan's emotional wounds were deeper. He remembered betrayal, lost friendships, and the loneliness that had driven him into the burning land. Some nights, memories overwhelmed him, and he would wake with fear and anger. Clara never tried to erase his pain. Instead, she offered presence. She sat silently near him, sometimes saying, "You are still here. That is enough for now." Clara's lessons extended beyond chores and survival. She taught him manners, patience, and quiet reflection. When Ethan wanted to rush through tasks or complain about the heat, she would gently remind him to pause and observe. "The land has its rhythm," she said. "If you move with it, it can teach you. If you fight it, it will break you." Ethan began to understand that she was teaching him more than survival. She was teaching him how to live with respect, humility, and awareness. Slowly, trust began to grow between them. Ethan realized he had been too proud to rely on anyone before. Clara had shown him that asking for help did not mean weakness. It meant courage. He began sharing small pieces of himself, memories of childhood, small fears, things he had not told anyone for years. Clara listened with care, never judging, never interrupting. For the first time in a long while, he felt heard. Through it all, Clara's quiet presence reminded Ethan of another truth. Life continues even after loss. The land can be harsh, the sun can burn, but patience, compassion, and effort can create small victories. These lessons were not easy, but they were honest. And for Ethan, honesty had become a rare treasure. By the end of the weeks he spent recovering in Clara's home, Ethan had changed more than he expected. He was stronger, yes, but also calmer. He was learning to respect the land, the people, and himself. The shame that had weighed so heavily on him began to lighten. He started thinking of the future in small ways, imagining a life where he could make better choices, learn from mistakes, and maybe even give back. Clara watched the changes quietly, never claiming credit. She knew that real growth comes from within, and no one else can force it. She had only opened the door and provided guidance. Ethan had stepped through it on his own, slowly and deliberately, but undeniably. For Ethan, the days with Clara became lessons in patience, kindness, and courage. Each day was a step toward life again, not just survival. He realized that being alive was not enough. Learning to live, to trust, and to care was the true challenge. Clara had given him a chance, but he was discovering that the chance was only valuable if he used it to grow. By the time the sun finally dipped below the horizon one evening, Ethan felt stronger, not only in body but in spirit. He understood that he had been saved not by chance, but by Clara's deliberate choice to act when he could not save himself. and he realized that to truly honor this gift, he would need to continue learning from her, lessons that would guide him not just through the heat of the sun, but through the challenges of life itself. And so, in the quiet home on the edge of the land, two lives began to intertwine, one broken and left for dead, and the other scarred by loss yet unbroken. Together they would learn, grow, and face the future, one patient, careful step at a time. Ethan had recovered enough to stand on his own, but his mind was still fragile. The desert sun no longer seemed like a punishment, but it still tested him. Every movement reminded him of weakness, and every shadow reminded him of danger he had barely survived. Clara, always quiet and careful, began introducing him to the next stage of his recovery, not just survival, but learning to live with purpose. It started with small tasks. Clara handed him a broom and asked him to sweep the porch. At first he laughed nervously, thinking it was a trivial chore. He had survived hunger, thirst, and betrayal, and now he was sweeping a porch? Clara simply smiled and said, "Everything matters, even the smallest things. Life builds from the little actions." Ethan tried to take her words lightly, but over time he realized their truth. Sweeping the porch was more than cleaning. It was about noticing, focusing, and being present. As he brushed away dust, he felt a strange satisfaction in the neat lines he left behind. For the first time in years, he felt in control of something, however small. Clara's lessons continued each day. She showed him how to feed the animals and care for the garden. She explained why plants needed water at certain times and why the animals required gentle patience. At first, Ethan's movements were clumsy. He dropped the water bucket, spilled the feed, and tripped over himself while trying to lift a heavy sack. Clara never scolded him. She simply corrected him gently, letting him learn through experience. "Patience," she said one morning as Ethan struggled to carry a watering can. "If you rush, you harm more than you help." Ethan felt frustrated. He wanted quick results, instant progress, the kind of immediate satisfaction he had once believed life offered. But the land and Clara taught him differently. Progress was measured in slow, steady steps. He began to see that strength was not only physical, it was the ability to endure mistakes, to learn, and to improve little by little. Clara also began teaching him respect, not just for the land, but for life itself. She explained how even small creatures, like bees or lizards, played a role in keeping the world balanced. At first, Ethan thought it was excessive, but as he watched her work, he realized the truth. Every action mattered. Every life mattered. This new perspective humbled him. It made him think of the people he had lost, the friendships he had betrayed, and the trust he had misused. For the first time, he felt a need to repair not just his life, but the way he lived it. The work was hard, and some days Ethan felt ready to give up. He would drop the tools, slump in the shade, and stare at the hot land, wondering why he had to start again at his age. Clara never pressured him. She simply sat beside him, or continued her own work quietly. Her presence reminded him that effort itself had value. No one cheered for him, no one demanded results, yet something inside him grew stronger with each passing day. Evenings were different. After the sun dipped low, the heat softened, and Clara would sit with Ethan on the porch. Sometimes they said little, watching the colors change across the sky. Sometimes they spoke of life, of choices, mistakes, and the power of forgiveness. Ethan slowly began to open up. He shared small memories, tiny fragments of his past. Clara listened carefully, never judging, only guiding. "You've been hurt," she said one evening, her eyes soft in the fading light. "And yet you are here. That is proof you can endure more than you know." Her words struck a chord. Ethan had believed himself weak, a man left for dead, unworthy of care. Yet Clara's faith in him made him see a different possibility. Perhaps he was not defined by the worst moments of his past. Perhaps he could choose to live differently now. Gradually, Ethan began to take initiative. He would water the plants without being asked, feed the animals on his own, or repair a fence before Clara noticed it needed fixing. Each small success gave him confidence. He began to notice the rhythm of life around him, the sun rising and setting, the wind moving through the trees, the animals following their routines. Life, he realized, had patterns. If he learned them, he could live with purpose instead of merely surviving. One afternoon, Clara asked him to dig a small trench to channel water to the garden. It was physically exhausting, and Ethan's hands blistered quickly. He wanted to stop and complain, but Clara only said, "Keep going, one step at a time." Something about her calm confidence pushed him forward. By the time the trench was finished, sweat drenched him, but he felt a new sense of pride. He had created something meaningful with his own hands, and for the first time he understood the satisfaction of honest effort. Beyond physical lessons, Clara also taught Ethan emotional strength. She encouraged him to face small fears, like walking alone to the stream, or handling the animals by himself. She would stand nearby, watching but not intervening unless necessary. Each time he succeeded, he gained trust in himself. Slowly, he began to understand that courage was built in moments of quiet persistence, not sudden heroics. Ethan also started noticing changes in his mind. He no longer woke in the middle of the night panicked or haunted by memories of betrayal. The land and Clara's calm routines gave him stability. He learned to breathe, to observe, to reflect. He began keeping track of his day, small victories and mistakes alike. He started thinking ahead, planning small improvements, and imagining a future beyond mere survival. Clara, ever patient, continued to guide him subtly. She asked questions instead of giving answers, encouraging him to think for himself. "Why do you think the plants grow better when watered gently?" she asked. Ethan hesitated, then realized that force only broke things, while patience nurtured growth. The lesson applied to people as much as plants. Trust, kindness, and care were stronger than demands or anger. Through the hard work and careful guidance, Ethan learned something deeper. He had been running from life, from responsibility, from himself. Being left for dead had forced him to face the fragility of his existence. But Clara taught him that life was not about avoiding pain. It was about facing it and finding meaning anyway. The desert had been harsh, but it had prepared him to receive her lessons. One evening, as the wind cooled the land, Ethan helped Clara carry a basket of vegetables inside. He noticed the quiet pride in her movements, the gentle way she arranged things. For the first time, he felt a sense of belonging. He was not just a guest or a survivor. He was a part of the rhythm of this home, this life. Clara had given him more than safety. She had given him direction, purpose, and hope. Ethan's mind began to wander toward the future. He thought of returning to the world beyond the land, but not as the broken man who had been left to die. He imagined himself stronger, patient, and thoughtful. He imagined facing people honestly, asking for forgiveness where needed, and living with integrity. For the first time, he realized that a life rebuilt carefully and honestly could be more meaningful than the one he had lost. Even as he worked and learned, Ethan never forgot the day Clara found him. He understood that her choice to act, to save a man she did not know, had altered his destiny. He began to see that people who choose compassion create ripples in the world. Without her, he would have ended under the sun, another forgotten soul. With her, he had a chance not just to live, but to become someone worth knowing again. Clara watched his progress quietly. She did not praise him excessively, but her eyes reflected approval and satisfaction. She knew that true growth comes slowly, through effort, mistakes, and reflection. Each day, Ethan was becoming not only stronger but wiser. She saw the shadows of shame and fear lifting from him, replaced by calm determination. As the weeks passed, Ethan's transformation became visible to himself and to Clara. His movements were confident, his mind sharp, and his heart open to new experiences. Yet, he remained humble. He understood that learning to live required patience, dedication, and respect. The lessons he received from Clara and the land were not easy, but they were honest. He began to understand that survival alone is not life. Living fully requires care, thought, and courage. By the end of this period, Ethan had learned the importance of discipline, patience, and humility. He no longer rushed, no longer demanded instant results. He had learned to listen, to observe, and to act with purpose. The simple chores, the quiet guidance, and the daily routines had become his teachers. He was ready for the next step, facing the past he had tried to escape, understanding the mistakes he had made, and learning how to carry his life forward with honesty. Through it all, one truth became clear. Clara had not only saved his life, she had taught him how to live it. The land, the work, and her quiet lessons showed him that even after the harshest trials, it is possible to grow, heal, and find meaning. Ethan understood that life's true strength comes not from surviving alone, but from learning, trusting, and moving forward with patience and courage. And so, in the small house on the edge of the harsh land, Ethan continued to learn. He was no longer a man left for dead under the burning sun. He was becoming someone new, someone strong, patient, and aware, ready to face the challenges ahead, guided by the lessons of the widow who had taught him to live again. Weeks had passed since Ethan had regained most of his strength. His body was no longer weak, and his steps were steady. Yet the weight of his past still pressed heavily on his mind. He had survived the desert, the burning sun, and near death itself, but what haunted him most was the life he had left behind. The mistakes, betrayals, and failures he could never forget. Each night as the stars rose above Clara's home, those memories crept quietly into his mind, reminding him of the man he used to be. Ethan had learned to live again in body, but he had not yet learned to live in heart and mind. The shame of betrayal, the guilt of broken trust, and the fear of being abandoned again shadowed him constantly. At first, he tried to avoid thinking about it. He kept busy with chores, tending the garden, caring for the animals, and learning the rhythms of the land. These routines brought comfort, but they could not erase the past. It lingered like a shadow, waiting for the quiet moments to remind him of all he had lost. Clara noticed his restlessness. One evening, as they sat together on the porch, she placed a gentle hand on his arm. "Ethan," she said softly, "you have learned to survive. You have learned patience and strength. But survival is not enough. You must face your past if you want to truly live." Ethan looked away, his chest tightening. He had long avoided thinking about those he had trusted and lost. Speaking of it felt dangerous, as though it might crush him again. But Clara's words carried no judgment, only understanding. She had seen grief, pain, and failure herself. She knew the cost of hiding from the truth. Her quiet presence gave him courage he did not know he had. I, I don't know if I can, Ethan admitted, his voice shaking. The mistakes I made, the people I hurt, I don't deserve to face them. Clara's eyes softened. No one is perfect, Ethan. We all stumble. The important thing is to stand again, not to hide. Facing the past does not erase it, but it teaches you how to be stronger. You cannot truly live until you understand yourself and the choices you made. The next day, Clara began helping Ethan prepare. Ice guided him through small exercises, writing down memories, reflecting on mistakes, and speaking them aloud when he felt ready. At first, Ethan hesitated, his hands shaking as he put thoughts to paper. Memories he had tried to bury for years resurfaced. The friends who turned away, the family he disappointed, the opportunities he had squandered. Each recollection carried pain, but writing them down made them tangible, less like shadows haunting him and more like lessons he could examine. Clara never forced him. She simply sat nearby, providing a steady presence. "It's okay to feel pain," she said, "but don't let it control you. Learn from it and then release it." Ethan slowly began to open up about his experiences. He admitted to trusting the wrong people, to making decisions that hurt others, and to running from responsibilities when things became difficult. Speaking aloud was painful. His voice trembled, and tears fell freely. Yet with each confession, a weight lifted. For the first time in years, he felt the possibility of forgiveness, not from others, but from himself. Clara shared some of her own experiences, too. She spoke of losing her husband suddenly, of the loneliness that followed, and of the strength she had found in small daily routines. Her stories were not meant to overshadow his pain. They were meant to show him that survival and healing were possible, even after the deepest loss. Listening to her, Ethan began to see a path forward. He realized that his past did not define him, but it could guide him if he was willing to learn. As Ethan reflected on his mistakes, he also began to consider the people he had hurt. He realized that some relationships could never be repaired, but others might have a chance if he approached them with honesty. He began to plan small steps, letters he could write, apologies he could offer, and actions he could take to make amends. Clara encouraged him to take his time. "Healing is not instant," she reminded him. "It comes slowly, and sometimes it requires patience with others, as well as with yourself." Facing the past was not easy. Some memories returned with a sharpness that made Ethan want to retreat. There were nights he stayed awake, haunted by regret, wondering if he had any right to move forward. But Clara never let him give up. She reminded him that courage was not the absence of fear, but acting despite it. She taught him to confront memories with honesty and compassion rather than with anger or shame. Through this process, Ethan began to notice changes within himself. He felt lighter, calmer, and more focused. The bitterness that had once consumed him began to fade. He understood that acknowledging mistakes did not mean reliving them endlessly. It meant learning from them. Each reflection brought clarity, and each step forward strengthened his resolve to live differently. One day, Clara asked him to walk to a nearby stream alone, carrying only a small bucket. The journey was symbolic. He was to face the land and his fears without her immediate protection. At first, Ethan hesitated, unsure if he could manage. But he remembered her guidance, her patience, and the lessons he had learned about endurance and courage. Step by step, he moved forward, carrying the bucket carefully, mindful of each step. By the time he reached the water, he felt a sense of accomplishment he had not known in years. The world, harsh and challenging, had not defeated him. Returning with the water, Ethan felt a new confidence. Clara greeted him with a quiet smile. "You see," she said, "you can face challenges when you trust yourself." Her approval was not boastful. It was gentle, yet it carried immense power. Ethan understood that he was no longer the man left for dead under the burning sun. He had grown, learned, and faced his fears. Over time, he began to reconcile with some parts of his past. He wrote letters to those he had hurt, expressing remorse and understanding, even if he could not guarantee forgiveness. He took responsibility for his actions, not to gain praise, but to free himself from the weight of guilt. Each act of honesty brought him closer to peace. Clara continued to guide him subtly. She reminded him that facing the past did not erase it, but it allowed him to move forward without being chained to it. She encouraged reflection, patience, and compassion. She never pushed him too fast, knowing that true healing required time and care. Through this process, Ethan began to see life differently. The mistakes he had made were no longer simply failures. They were lessons. Betrayal, loss, and pain had shaped him, but they did not define him. What defined him now was the courage to face those memories, the willingness to grow, and the determination to live honestly. The land around Clara's home mirrored this transformation. Once harsh and intimidating, it now felt like a partner in his journey. Each tree, rock, and stream seemed to whisper lessons about resilience and patience. The same sun that had almost killed him now shone as a reminder of endurance and strength. Each day became an opportunity to act with intention, not fear. Ethan also began to understand the depth of Clara's teaching. She had not merely saved him from death, she had saved him from himself. Her patience, wisdom, and quiet guidance had given him the tools to rebuild his life, step by step. She had taught him survival, strength, and resilience, but most importantly, she had taught him the courage to face truth, even when it hurt. By the end of this period, Ethan's transformation was remarkable. He had learned to face his past without being consumed by it. He had developed self-awareness, honesty, and a sense of responsibility. He understood that living fully required more than breathing. It required confronting fears, acknowledging mistakes, and growing from them. One evening, as they watched the sun set together, Ethan felt a profound gratitude. He had been left for dead under the burning sun, abandoned and forgotten. Yet through Clara's guidance, he had learned to rise again, not as a man running from his past, but as one willing to face it, learn from it, and live fully despite it. Clara's quiet eyes met his. "You are ready," she said softly, "not just to survive, but to live." Ethan understood the weight of her words. He had faced his past, acknowledged his mistakes, and taken the first steps toward rebuilding his life. The journey was far from over, but he now carried the tools to move forward with strength, courage, and wisdom. And so, in the small house on the edge of the land, under the same sun that had once threatened to destroy him, Ethan began to live, not just for survival, but with purpose. He had faced his past, learned from it, and was ready to embrace the life ahead, guided by the lessons of the widow who had taught him to face himself and grow. Ethan had changed more than he realized. His body was strong again, and his mind was calm. But the most important change was in his heart. He no longer carried the weight of fear, shame, or despair. Instead, he had learned patience, responsibility, and the quiet strength of resilience. He had faced the harshest part of life, survived it, and now understood what it truly meant to live. Clara watched him carefully. She had guided him through the most difficult lessons: survival, humility, and the courage to face his past, but she knew that life outside the small house would test him in ways she could not. "You have learned to live here," she said one evening, "but life is larger than this land. You must carry these lessons into the world beyond." Ethan nodded. He understood. The world outside was unpredictable, and mistakes still lingered in his past. Yet he felt ready. The fear that had once kept him running no longer controlled him. He had learned to trust his own strength and judgment. He had learned to face challenges without giving up. The first step was simple but symbolic. Ethan helped Clara repair the fence around her garden. He carried heavy posts, hammered carefully, and checked the lines for stability. The work required focus, patience, and precision, the same qualities Clara had taught him. By the time the fence was finished, he felt a quiet pride. This small accomplishment reminded him that life was built from consistent effort, not shortcuts. Afterward, they walked together to the edge of the land. Ethan paused, looking out over the desert. Once, this view had terrified him. The sun, the vast emptiness, the sense of isolation. It had all been almost too much to bear. Now, he saw it differently. The land was still harsh, but it was also beautiful. It had tested him, shaped him, and now offered him perspective. He felt gratitude for every hardship that had brought him to this moment. Clara placed a hand on his shoulder. "You are ready to step back into the world," she said softly. "Not as the man you were, but as someone stronger, wiser, and more patient." Ethan thought of the people he had hurt in the past, the opportunities he had lost, and the mistakes he had made. He knew he could not erase them, but he could approach the world with honesty and integrity. He could take responsibility for his actions and rebuild trust where possible. The lessons Clara had taught him were not just about survival. They were about living fully, thoughtfully, and courageously. Before he left, Clara gave him a simple gift, a small, worn notebook. "Write your journey," she said. "Remember what you have learned. Use it to guide yourself when life becomes difficult again." Ethan accepted it with a nod, understanding that her gift was more than a notebook. It was a reminder of his rebirth, a symbol of the second chance she had given him. When the day came for Ethan to leave, he felt a mixture of emotions: sadness at leaving the place that had saved him, gratitude toward Clara, and excitement for the possibilities ahead. Clara walked beside him as he packed a few belongings into a small bag. She did not offer long goodbyes or tearful speeches. Instead, she smiled quietly, knowing that the lessons she had given him were enough. "You are ready," she said again. "Go forward and live fully." Ethan stepped onto the path that led away from the house. The land stretched endlessly before him, but he no longer feared it. He walked with purpose, carrying the strength and wisdom he had gained. Each step reminded him of his journey, the days under the burning sun, the patient care Clara had shown him, the lessons learned through hard work and reflection. As he traveled, he began to notice the world in a new way. The people he met were no longer threats to be avoided, but connections to be nurtured. The land, once a place of danger and isolation, became a source of learning and resilience. Every challenge he faced reminded him of Clara's lessons: patience, observation, humility, and care. Ethan returned to some of the people he had wronged in the past. He did not expect forgiveness, but he offered honesty and remorse. He wrote letters, visited old friends, and acknowledged the mistakes he had made. Some accepted his apologies, others did not. He learned that while he could not control others' responses, he could control his own actions. Each attempt brought him a sense of freedom, a lifting of the burden that had weighed on him for years. In the world beyond Clara's home, Ethan found opportunities to rebuild his life. He worked steadily, took responsibility for his actions, and approached challenges with a new mindset. He was not perfect, but he was committed to learning and growing. He remembered every lesson Clara had taught him, every quiet word, every small task that had shaped his character. They guided him, even when no one else was there to instruct or support him. Months later, Ethan returned to Clara's home, not as a man in need, but as one who could give. He helped repair fences, tended the garden, and carried water for the animals. Clara watched him, her eyes reflecting pride and satisfaction. She had given him the tools to survive and live, but he had applied them on his own. His growth was his own achievement. One evening, as they watched the sun set together, Ethan realized something profound. Life's greatest lessons often come through struggle and care. The desert that had almost ended him, the near-death experience under the burning sun, and Clara's quiet guidance had all combined to teach him resilience, patience, and purpose. He understood that life could be harsh, but it could also be beautiful, and that even the most difficult experiences could bring growth. Ethan began helping others who were struggling, using the lessons he had learned to guide them. He shared his story, not to seek attention, but to inspire hope. He taught that survival is only the first step. True life requires facing fears, learning from mistakes, and moving forward with courage and care. Clara's teachings had become a foundation, not just for him, but for anyone willing to listen and learn. Through his journey, Ethan realized the depth of Clara's impact. She had not only saved his life physically, but had transformed his understanding of what it means to live. Her patience, quiet guidance, and compassion had given him the tools to rebuild himself, face the world honestly, and embrace life fully. Ethan no longer feared the challenges ahead. He knew that life would test him again, but he had the strength, wisdom, and resilience to meet those challenges. Each obstacle was an opportunity to apply the lessons he had learned, to grow further, and to honor the second chance he had been given. Years later, Ethan often reflected on that time under the burning sun. He remembered the despair, the fear, and the sense of hopelessness. But he also remembered Clara's quiet courage, her unwavering patience, and the lessons she had taught him through simple acts of care and guidance. He understood that life's true value is measured not by what we survive, but by how we grow, learn, and give back after hardship. The man who had once been left for dead had become someone who truly lived. He had learned to face his past, rebuild his life, and approach the world with honesty and courage. The sun that had once threatened to destroy him now shone as a symbol of endurance and hope. And through it all, Clara remained a quiet presence in his life, a reminder that even the smallest acts of kindness can change a person's destiny. The widow who had found him under the burning sun had not just taught him to survive, she had taught him to live fully, to face the world bravely, and to embrace life with gratitude, courage, and purpose. Ethan's life was no longer defined by fear or regret. It was defined by action, learning, and the strength to rise after the darkest moments. The lessons he had received and the growth he had achieved became a foundation for the life he now led, a life that honored both the past and the hope for the future. The journey had been long and painful, but it had transformed him completely. He understood now that true life comes not from avoiding hardship, but from meeting it, learning from it, and moving forward with intention and care. Each day became a choice to live fully, to give back, and to embrace the potential for growth that exists even after the most difficult trials. As the sun set on another day, Ethan stood at the edge of the land, looking out at the horizon with gratitude and hope. He had survived death, learned to live, and now carried the lessons forward. Life, he realized, was not about being perfect or never falling. It was about rising again, stronger and wiser each time. Clara, standing beside him, did not speak. Her presence was enough. She had given him the most important gift, the ability to face life honestly, bravely, and fully. Ethan understood this now, and for the first time in his life he felt truly free. The man who had been left for dead under the burning sun was no longer a victim of circumstance. He had become a man of strength, courage, and purpose. Through patience, guidance, and the lessons of compassion, he had learned to live, and in doing so, he had found a life worth cherishing.